For more than 3 decades, Jennifer Aniston has been more than just an actress. She has been a living emblem of beauty, grace, and resilience, a face so familiar that it feels etched into the collective memory of an entire generation. Through her unforgettable portrayal of Rachel Green in Friends, she became not only America's sweetheart, but also a symbol of light-hearted charm in a world that often craved escape. Her voice, her smile, even the effortless sway of her walk were broadcast into millions of homes, becoming part of the soundtrack of people's lives. Yet beneath that golden glow, behind the glitter of red carpets and the headlines that celebrated her every move, there has always been another story, one that few truly saw. A story where every radiant smile concealed invisible cracks, where each graceful step was carefully placed on the shattered glass of private pain. Jennifer carried herself like a beacon of hope, but in the quiet of her own world, she was fighting battles no applause could soothe. Now, at 56, her journey tells a truth far more raw than the glossy magazine covers ever revealed. A fractured childhood that left her heart bruised long before she was famous. Love stories that seemed perfect under flashing cameras but collapsed in silence behind closed doors. And the most tender of struggles, a desperate, soul-wrenching desire to become a mother that ended in sorrow too deep to measure. These were not fleeting hardships. They were storms that clung to her for decades, shaping her into the woman we see today. She has endured betrayals, heartbreaks, and relentless scrutiny from a world that demanded she stay perfect, forever frozen as the girl we first met in the 90s. And still, through all of it, she stood. If Jennifer Aniston has ever made you laugh until your sides ached, or cry at a line that felt too close to home, then her life deserves more than admiration. It deserves reflection, because behind every beloved name, behind every dazzling star, there lies a hidden story, and for Jennifer Joanna Aniston, it is a story far less glamorous than the spotlight suggests, yet infinitely more human. Long before the world adored her as Rachel Green, Jennifer was just a little girl, navigating the fragile cracks of a home that looked charmed on the outside but trembled within. Born on the 11th of February, 1969, in Sherman Oaks, Los Angeles, she entered the world already surrounded by the bright glow of Hollywood. Her father, John Aniston, a Greek-born actor with a commanding screen presence, and her mother, Nancy Dow, an actress of mixed Italian, English, Irish, Scottish, and Greek descent, seemed to embody glamour and artistry. Her godfather, none other than legendary actor Telly Savalas, added another brushstroke of Hollywood mystique to her early life. To outsiders, this looked like the perfect recipe for a golden childhood. But fame, as Jennifer would later reflect, was something that surrounded her, not something that filled her. The glitter of legacy could not soften the emotional fractures beneath. She had 2 half-brothers, John Mellick, older and from her mother's first marriage, and Alex Aniston, much younger, from her father's later relationship. While her family tree was tangled with talent and prestige, the roots were fragile. When Jennifer was still a toddler, her father's career pulled the family to New York City. The towering skyscrapers and buzzing energy dazzled her young eyes, but no bright lights could chase away the gathering storm within her home. By the time she was only 9 years old, the fragile bond between her parents shattered. One day, her father walked out. He didn't just leave for work that morning, he left her daily life, disappearing into silence that stretched on for years. That silence was more devastating than the absence itself. Jennifer would later recall how the quiet after her father's departure wrapped around her like a suffocating fog. She was far too young to understand, but old enough to feel the ache of abandonment. It was the moment she first learned that love, no matter how solid it seemed, could vanish without warning. At home, a different wound was taking shape. Her mother, celebrated for her beauty, often placed Jennifer under a harsh microscope. Comments about her weight, her posture, her hair words meant perhaps as guidance cut deep into her sensitive young spirit. What was intended as advice became barbs that planted seeds of self-doubt, seeds that would take decades for Jennifer to uproot. And then there was the reality of life itself. Money was often tight, and warmth was not always abundant. Jennifer learned early that laughter could be both gift and shield. If she could entertain, if she could make people laugh, maybe they wouldn't notice the sadness flickering beneath her eyes. Maybe they wouldn't see the cracks. This was the soil in which Jennifer's resilience was first planted. A fractured home, a mother's critical gaze, and the echo of a father's absence. Pain became her teacher. Performance, even in the small living room of her childhood, became her escape. The girl who seemed destined for stardom was, at her core, simply trying to survive a childhood where affection felt uncertain and love could not be trusted to stay. As Jennifer stepped cautiously into adulthood, carrying the weight of her childhood wounds, one of those scars would be torn wide open again, this time in a way that pierced deeper than she ever imagined. In 1996, while her career was beginning to rise, her mother, Nancy Dow, appeared on a tabloid talk show. To the world, it was another celebrity guest. To Jennifer, it was a devastating betrayal. Intimate details of her private life, things a daughter never expects to be shared, were suddenly offered up under the harsh glare of television lights. But that was only the beginning. A few years later, Nancy went even further, publishing a memoir titled From Mother and Daughter to Friends. In its pages, she aired their private struggles as if they were entertainment, laying bare the wounds of their relationship for strangers to dissect. To Jennifer, it wasn't just a book, it was a rupture, an intimate breach of trust that left her feeling exposed and betrayed by the very person who should have been her greatest protector. The fallout was catastrophic. For nearly 15 years, mother and daughter did not speak. The silence between them was not like the silence of her father's absence when she was a child. It was heavier, sharper, filled with the weight of words spoken that could never be unsaid. Jennifer described it later with heartbreaking simplicity. Some wounds take a very long time to heal, if they ever do at all. And yet, that painful estrangement shaped her in ways that would define her. It taught her to be guarded, to hold her private self behind walls even as the world demanded access to every corner of her life. It forced her to cultivate a fierce self-reliance, to depend on no one but herself when the people she trusted most had broken that trust. Still, there was a cost. Every photograph of mother and daughter together in Jennifer's childhood albums became a reminder of what was lost. Every Mother's Day, every family gathering, every mention of home carried the shadow of absence. The betrayal left scars that didn't simply fade with time. They became part of her emotional landscape, etched so deeply that even reconciliation years later could not erase them entirely. This chapter of her life, defined by the silence between mother and daughter, revealed the fragility of love within family ties. And yet, from that silence, Jennifer drew something powerful: empathy for pain, and a resilience that would carry her through the storms fame was about to unleash. Amid the chaos of her fractured family life, Jennifer discovered a fragile but luminous refuge: storytelling. As a young girl, she would retreat into her room, scribbling thoughts in worn notebooks, sketching ideas, and slipping into daydreams where she could be anyone, anywhere. In those moments, imagination became her sanctuary, a secret world where the sting of criticism and the ache of absence could not follow her. By the mid-1972nd, while other children were losing themselves in carefree playground laughter, Jennifer was already venturing into imaginary realms. At just 6 years old, she understood something most children never needed to, that sometimes you escape into stories not for fun, but for survival. In those private corners of her childhood, acting wasn't just a pastime, it was a lifeline. Her parents recognized this spark and enrolled her in the Waldorf school, an environment that encouraged creativity and gave her the first real stage on which to test her voice. There, she discovered not just play acting, but the power of stepping into another's skin, of speaking through a character what she couldn't always say as herself. Storytelling became her language, performance her shield. But her path wasn't simply one of nurture and encouragement. Even within this haven, she still carried the sting of her mother's critiques, the weight of self-doubt, The worry that she might never measure up, that conflict between longing to be seen and fear of being judged, sharpened her gift. It gave her performances an authenticity born not of mimicry but of lived experience. In 1983, at 14, Jennifer entered one of the most defining crucibles of her youth, LaGuardia High School of Music and Art and Performing Arts in New York City, the same school immortalized by fame. Under the demanding but inspiring guidance of respected acting coach Anthony Abeson, she learned that acting wasn't about pretending, it was about daring to strip away defenses and reveal the soul beneath. The process terrified her, but it also transformed her. Rehearsal rooms smelled faintly of paint and dust, the kind of spaces where dreams and doubts collided daily. In those rooms, Jennifer confronted her greatest fear: belonging. "I just wanted to belong somewhere," she would say decades later, her voice heavy with both gratitude and ache. In the faces of classmates and in the vulnerability of performance, she began to find that elusive place of belonging, even if only for moments at a time. Graduating in 1987, however, did not open a door to stardom. Instead, it ushered her into the grind. The dream she had nurtured for years became a fragile, uncertain pursuit. Her days were filled not with red carpets but with odd jobs, selling timeshares in windowless offices, waiting tables for customers who barely looked at her, peddling deliveries across Manhattan's unforgiving streets on a rattling second-hand bicycle. Each audition was another fragile hope, another chance to prove herself, followed too often by rejection or silence. Her early roles, a Blink and You'll Miss It part in Mac and Me in 1988, commercials for Nutrisystem, small television gigs were flickers of light that quickly went out. Between 1990 and 1994, she moved from one short-lived sitcom to another: Malloy, Ferris Bueller, The Edge, Muddling Through. Each time, she thought perhaps this would be the break, only to have it yanked away. By her mid-20s, Jennifer was worn thin. Each disappointment gnawed at her spirit, and she quietly wondered if the little girl who once dreamed in the shadows of her childhood had been naive to believe she could make a life out of those dreams. But deep down, even as her confidence frayed, the spark refused to die. And then, as so often happens in Hollywood's strangest turns, fate arrived, disguised as something ordinary, a chance encounter at a gas station that would alter the course of her life forever. It was the early 1992nd, and Jennifer Aniston was standing at the edge of giving up. Years of false starts and canceled shows had chipped away at her confidence, leaving her exhausted, carrying trays in restaurants and auditioning with the quiet dread that perhaps she didn't belong in Hollywood after all. But destiny, as it so often does in stories that feel almost scripted, arrived in the most unremarkable disguise. One afternoon, while filling her tank at a Los Angeles gas station, Jennifer crossed paths with Warren Littlefield, the president of NBC Entertainment at the time. The encounter lasted only minutes, a brief exchange in the humdrum setting of everyday life, but the impact was seismic. Warren had seen her work, and unlike so many who had dismissed her, he recognized something unique, an alchemy of warmth, wit, and vulnerability. He looked at her and said words that would echo in her memory forever: "You have something. Don't quit." For Jennifer, those words were like sunlight breaking through years of storm clouds. After so many rejections, someone powerful had finally looked her in the eye and seen her worth. And because of that, she didn't quit. Soon after, she auditioned for a new sitcom. NBC was developing a show about 6 friends navigating love, life, and adulthood in New York City. At first, she read for the role of Monica Geller, but the producers quickly realized she wasn't Monica. She was Rachel Green, and Rachel Green was her. It was as though the role had been waiting for her all along, a perfect fusion of Jennifer's quick wit, natural charm, and the fragility that audiences would instantly connect with. When she walked into that audition room in 1994, she couldn't have known she was stepping into the role that would define a generation, catapult her into global superstardom, and cement her as a permanent fixture in the cultural imagination. From her very first line, Jennifer lit up the screen. There was something disarmingly real about her, Rachel, funny but flawed, glamorous but vulnerable, confident but yearning. Audiences didn't just watch her, they felt as though they knew her. She became not just a character in a sitcom, but a friend in living rooms across the world. Friends premiered that same year, and almost overnight, it became a cultural juggernaut. For 10 years, Thursday nights belonged to Rachel, Ross, Monica, Chandler, Joey, and Phoebe. Millions tuned in weekly, quoting lines, debating romances, and emulating Rachel's hairstyles. The Rachel haircut alone sparked a global phenomenon, a trend that women carried into salons, demanding the same layered style. Yet with the joy of success came a new burden. The line between Jennifer Aniston and Rachel Green blurred until even she sometimes felt trapped inside her character's shadow. The world saw Rachel the glamorous, lovable fashionista, but Jennifer was still the girl who had once hidden behind jokes to survive the wounds of her childhood. Fame had wrapped her in warmth, yes, but it also came with a heat that could scorch. By the late 1992, Jennifer was no longer just another actress struggling for roles. She was the face of the most beloved sitcom on television, one of Hollywood's highest-paid stars, and a woman whose smile had become a cultural symbol. But the weight of that visibility carried its own invisible chains. The breakthrough had come dazzling, intoxicating, unforgettable. But behind it, Jennifer quietly understood. Success had saved her dream, but it had also bound her to expectations she would spend the next decade learning how to break. The runaway success of Friends was like a tidal wave, thrilling, unstoppable, but also overwhelming. Jennifer Aniston, once the struggling actress scraping by with odd jobs, was now one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. Every Thursday night, millions tuned in, not just to laugh but to see her. Rachel Green wasn't simply a role anymore, she was a cultural obsession. Suddenly, Jennifer's life was no longer her own. Her haircuts became international news. Magazines filled pages debating whether the Rachel was the most influential hairstyle of the decade. Every outfit she wore, on or off set, was photographed, analyzed, and copied by fans across the world. What should have been small personal choices, how she wore her hair, what jeans she bought, how she held her bag, became global trends, dissected by strangers she would never meet. But beneath that glittering success was a pressure most could never comprehend. With the spotlight came the demand for perfection. Every smile, every word in interviews, every red carpet pose had to fit the image the world had created of Jennifer Aniston, America's sweetheart. That meant being flawless, being funny, being the Rachel everyone thought they knew. It was intoxicating and suffocating at the same time, a gilded cage built not of steel bars, but of public expectation. The awards validated her brilliance. An Emmy, a Golden Globe, a Screen Actors Guild Award. By the final season of Friends, she was earning the then unprecedented $1 million per episode, placing her among television's highest-paid stars. On paper, she had everything. She was the dream realized, the girl who had gone from struggling actress to Hollywood's brightest star. But numbers and trophies only told part of the story. What they didn't capture was the exhaustion that came from constantly performing, not just as Rachel, but as Jennifer Aniston herself, the version of Jennifer that the world demanded to see. In the quiet corners of her life, she longed for something more authentic, something that wasn't dictated by what the tabloids expected or what fans projected onto her. So she began to rebel, quietly but purposefully. In 2002, she broke away from the glossy sitcom mold with The Good Girl, playing a disillusioned store clerk whose raw vulnerability stunned critics and audiences alike. Stripped of glamour, she proved she wasn't just the pretty face of a hit sitcom. She was an actress with depth, with shadows, with truth. A year later, she showed a different side altogether in Bruce Almighty, holding her own opposite Jim Carrey in a film that shattered box office records. Then came Marley and Me in 2008, a tender, heartbreaking story that left audiences in tears and earned over $200 million worldwide. Each of these roles was more than just a job, they were declarations. Declarations that she was more than Rachel Green, more than a haircut, more than America's sweetheart. She wanted the world to see her as she was. Complicated, layered, capable of humor and heartbreak in equal measure. But breaking out of a golden image is never simple. Fame gave her everything she once dreamed of: recognition, influence, wealth, but it also chained her to a persona she hadn't entirely chosen. Jennifer was grateful, but she was restless, and deep inside, she knew that even as her career soared, her personal life was about to be tested in ways that no award or box office success could ever shield her from. At the dazzling height of her career, when Jennifer Aniston seemed to have everything: fame, fortune, and adoration from millions, life offered her something even more intoxicating: love. Not the scripted, laugh-track romance of a sitcom, but a real-life connection that seemed pulled from the pages of a Hollywood fairy tale. It began quietly in 1998, through mutual friends who arranged what they called a blind date. But of course, in Hollywood, it was hardly blind. Brad Pitt was already one of cinema's golden boys, his mix of rugged intensity and soft sincerity having made him a household name from Legends of the Fall to Seven. Jennifer, by then, was firmly established as America's sweetheart. They were two stars burning at full intensity, and when their paths finally collided, the chemistry was immediate. Jennifer later described that first meeting with a kind of wistful nostalgia. It was easy. The noise of the world seemed to fade away as they sat across from each other, trading stories. No flashing cameras, no handlers whispering in the background. Just two people connecting in a way that felt startlingly real. For a woman who had grown up surrounded by brokenness and who had already been stung by betrayal, that ease felt like a miracle. When they stepped out together in public for the first time, the reaction was instantaneous. The tabloids anointed them Hollywood's golden couple before they had even taken their first vacation. To the outside world, they weren't just dating. They were proof that beauty, fame, and genuine love could coexist. Brad and Jen, the names rolled off tongues with the certainty of a brand. By 1999, Brad proposed, and the media frenzy reached a fever pitch. Paparazzi camped outside restaurants, desperate for glimpses of them together. Every smile, every handhold, every shared look became evidence for the fairy tale the world was writing on their behalf. For Jennifer, it was a rare period where she wore her happiness openly, without disguise. Interviews captured her glowing when his name was mentioned. Candid photos revealed a woman looking not at the cameras but at him, her eyes soft with trust. On the 29th of July, 2000, they wed in Malibu. It was a spectacle of intimacy and grandeur. All at once, 200 guests gathered inside a fortress-like estate, guarded by high walls that shielded the couple from the chaos outside. There were cascades of flowers, 1,000 candles glowing into the night, and fireworks bursting over the Pacific Ocean, as if the universe itself were celebrating. Jennifer, radiant in her beaded gown, walked toward Brad with a look that melted even the most cynical hearts. The world believed it was witnessing not just another celebrity wedding, but the birth of a true Hollywood love story. Their partnership wasn't limited to romance. Together, they founded Plan B Entertainment, a production company rooted in the belief that stories could change the world. It was more than just a business venture, it was a promise to build something lasting, both personally and professionally. Friends observed that during those years, Jennifer seemed lighter, freer, as if the guardedness of her childhood had been set down at last. She described Brad as her best friend, her partner in every sense of the word. And for a time, it looked as though her life had achieved perfect symmetry: a thriving career, a marriage envied by millions, and a future that stretched wide and bright. In sunlit afternoons in Malibu, when the cameras were gone and the house echoed with shared laughter instead of silence, Jennifer Aniston looked as though she had finally found what the little girl inside her had always longed for: a safe place to belong. For a while, she had it. For a while, it felt unbreakable. Every fairy tale sparkles brightest in its beginning, and for years the marriage of Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt was treated like Hollywood's perfect ending. But as the world continued to swoon over their red carpet appearances and magazine spreads, the cracks in their golden paradise began to appear subtle at first, almost invisible, until they widened into a chasm that could no longer be ignored. The demands of their careers, once a shared badge of ambition, slowly became the very wedge that pushed them apart. Film sets in distant countries, press tours that stretched for weeks, and schedules that left them crossing paths like travelers in different time zones, it all chipped away at the intimacy they had once cherished. Jennifer would later liken it to ships passing in the night, waving at each other from harbors they never seemed to reach in time. Then came the whispers. In early 2005, gossip magazines began murmuring about Brad's chemistry with Angelina Jolie on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. At first, it was just background noise in the endless hum of Hollywood rumor. But soon, the whispers grew teeth. Tabloids splashed insinuations across their covers, stolen glances on set, laughter between takes, a connection too strong to ignore. Neither Brad nor Angelina confirmed anything. But in the brutal world of celebrity culture, silence was its own damning verdict. For Jennifer, the rumors were a storm she hadn't invited but couldn't escape. Each trip to the grocery store, each walk to her car, each attempt at normalcy was ambushed by flashing cameras, hungry for a shot of her pain. Paparazzi camped outside her home, their shutters clicking like a mechanical heartbeat. Even the smallest gestures, a missing wedding ring, an unreturned glance on a red carpet, were dissected as evidence of collapse. By January 2005, the fairy tale had shattered. The announcement of their separation landed like a detonation, not only for Jennifer but for millions of fans who had built their own hope on the image of Brad and Jen. The world mourned as if a collective dream had died. But for Jennifer, it was far more personal. She wasn't just losing a husband, she was watching the dismantling of the life she had imagined growing old inside. And then came the cruelest cut of all. The rumors that she had chosen career over children, that she had been unwilling to give Brad the family he wanted. For a woman whose body and choices had been scrutinized for years, this narrative was salt ground into an open wound. Jennifer's voice carried quiet fire when she finally addressed it. "I do and I will." Those 4 words weren't just a denial, they were a defense of her womanhood, her right to be more than a womb for the world to judge. Nights became the hardest. Friends remember her returning home to a silence that pressed heavily against the walls, to a bed that suddenly felt far too wide. Therapy became her lifeline, yoga her anchor, and her closest friends her shield against a world ravenous for her breakdown. On set, she sometimes arrived with eyes rimmed red from the night before, yet delivered performances so raw they felt like open wounds captured on film. She didn't hide her heartbreak, she transformed it into art. For the tabloids, the Brad and Jen split was gold. For Jennifer, it was survival in the harshest spotlight imaginable. The woman who emerged from that crucible was no longer the glowing bride of Malibu. She was sharper, more guarded, but also more certain of who she was, a woman learning, painfully, that sometimes even the most beautiful fairy tales cannot last. When the fairy tale dissolved in 2005, Jennifer Aniston wasn't just left with the heartbreak of a marriage undone, she was left with an entire world watching, dissecting, and feeding on her pain. What should have been a private grief became a public spectacle, broadcast on glossy magazine covers and replayed endlessly on entertainment shows. For Jennifer, the loneliness wasn't simply the absence of Brad Pitt. It was the suffocating presence of millions of strangers inserting themselves into the most intimate wound of her life. Paparazzi turned her quiet streets into war zones. They staked out her driveway, followed her car, and turned even the smallest errands, picking up groceries, grabbing coffee into gauntlets of flashing bulbs. Her body language was analyzed frame by frame, her eyes scoured for tears, her smile for cracks. Every time she stepped outside, the world was hungry to see evidence of collapse. Inside her home, The silence was even more crushing. Friends described how she would return to rooms that once held shared laughter, only to feel the echo of emptiness pressing against the walls. The bed was too large. The coffee pot brewed for one. The house that had once been a sanctuary now felt like an empty stage where no one else would enter. Nights stretched long, and mornings arrived with the heavy reminder that life as she had known it was gone. And then came the rumors that cut deeper than all the rest, that she hadn't wanted children, that she had chosen ambition over motherhood. For a woman who had spent decades under the microscope of tabloids, scrutinized for every perceived flaw, this narrative was unbearable. It wasn't just gossip. It was an assault on her identity, her womanhood, her capacity for love. She responded with a quiet but fiery clarity. "I do, and I will." It was both a defense and a vow, not to the press, not even to Brad, but to herself. To survive, Jennifer leaned on therapy as a lifeline, a place where she could pour out the ache without fear of judgment. Yoga became more than exercise. It became her tether to the present moment, each breath and stretch reminding her she was still here, still whole, even when the world insisted she was broken. Her oldest friends, those who had known her before the sitcoms and the fame, became her armor, gathering around her not with pity, but with fierce loyalty. On set, she carried her pain like an invisible weight. There were days when she walked into work with eyes swollen from tears. Yet when the cameras rolled, she delivered performances so layered and aching that audiences felt something more than acting, they felt truth. Jennifer wasn't hiding her heartbreak. She was transmuting it, turning loss into art, despair into authenticity. For the tabloids, the divorce was entertainment. For Jennifer, it was a crucible. And what emerged from that fire was not the woman the world expected to see broken beyond repair, but a woman who, though scarred, was sharper, stronger, and more determined than ever to define her own life on her own terms. She no longer needed the world to believe in a fairy tale. She had learned the harder, lonelier truth, that survival itself can be the most powerful story of all. The end of Jennifer's marriage might have marked the closing of a chapter, but in the eyes of the world, her story was far from finished. Instead, it was cruelly rewritten not by her, but by tabloids and paparazzi, who refused to let her stand alone. Almost overnight, the narrative shifted. The golden couple of Brad and Jen was replaced by a new obsession. Brangelina, Brad Pitt, and Angelina Jolie, with their smoldering chemistry from Mr. and Mrs. Smith, quickly became Hollywood's most glamorous spectacle. Their growing family, first through adoption, then biological children, became the stuff of constant headlines. Humanitarian trips, red carpet appearances with a trail of children, radiant family portraits in glossy magazines, all of it fed the story of a new dynasty. And in the background, almost like a ghost haunting the edges of every photograph, was Jennifer's name. No matter what she did, she couldn't escape the comparisons. Every time Brad and Angelina appeared on a magazine cover, there was another side-by-side layout. The glowing new family on one page, and Jennifer on the other, often reduced to a cruel tagline: alone, childless, left behind. Strangers debated her worth as though it were public property, tallying her happiness against the number of children in Angelina's arms. Tabloids stalked her body for signs of pregnancy, zooming in on every loose dress, every curve of her stomach. A soft fold in a photograph was transformed into baby bump speculation. Headlines screamed, "Is Jen finally pregnant?" only to rip the hope away days later with sneering retractions. They turned her most private longing into a public scoreboard. Was she enough? Would she ever be? Why hadn't she given the world the image it craved: a child on her hip, a family to flaunt? The weight of it was corrosive. Jennifer admitted years later how exhausting it was, how relentless the scrutiny became. She was living her life, working, healing, piecing herself back together. Yet to the world, she had been reduced to the absence of a ring on her finger or a child in her arms. The ache of her divorce was already a wound. This was salt rubbed into it again and again. And still, she endured. She rebuilt herself quietly, brick by emotional brick. Her work became both refuge and defiance. In films like The Breakup, 2006, she transformed heartbreak into humor, delivering performances that mirrored her own reality. In Marley and Me, 2008, she invited audiences to cry with her over loss, turning vulnerability into box office gold. With Horrible Bosses, 2011, and We're the Millers, 2013, she proved her comedic sharpness was still unmatched, reminding Hollywood she could laugh in the face of pain. But perhaps her boldest declaration came with Cake in 2014. Stripped of glamour, her performance as a woman living with chronic pain was raw and unflinching, earning her critical acclaim. It wasn't just acting, it was Jennifer channeling years of her own grief and resilience into art. Then, in 2019, she reclaimed television with The Morning Show, not as America's sweetheart, not as Rachel, but as a woman confronting betrayal, sexism, and survival in a cutthroat industry. The role was a mirror of her own journey, scarred, unyielding, and fiercely authentic. Off-screen, she turned to the constants that fame couldn't corrode: yoga, therapy, and her circle of fiercely loyal friends. They weren't trends. They were survival. Breath by breath, pose by pose, session by session, she stitched herself back together in ways the public would never see. While the world insisted on comparing her to Angelina, Jennifer refused to compete. Quietly, steadily, she was carving out a narrative that belonged only to her. The tabloids might have crowned Brangelina the pinnacle of Hollywood love, but Jennifer was proving something even more radical: that survival, on your own terms, could be just as powerful as any love story. By the mid-2010s, Jennifer Aniston was tired. Not from her work, her career remained vibrant, full of roles that challenged her range and redefined her beyond the shadow of Rachel Green. What exhausted her was the endless, suffocating narrative imposed upon her. For more than a decade, she had been painted as the woman left behind, the lonely ex-wife, the eternal would she or wouldn't she mother. It was a role she had never agreed to play, but one the media forced upon her, headline after headline, cover after cover. In 2016, she decided enough was enough. With a clarity sharpened by years of endurance, Jennifer took back the pen. In a searing HuffPost essay titled "For the Record," she dismantled the myths that had clung to her life. She wrote not with bitterness, but with precision, stripping away the gossip like old wallpaper to reveal the raw truth beneath. We are complete with or without a mate, with or without a child. Those words reverberated far beyond Hollywood. They weren't just a defense of herself, they became a declaration for countless women who had been measured, diminished, and defined by outdated expectations. Jennifer was no longer answering the tabloids. She was speaking directly to the millions of women who had silently endured the same question: when will you settle down? When will you have children? But she didn't stop there. In interviews that followed, she showed a candor that startled those still clinging to the image of the untouchable golden girl. She admitted openly that she had undergone years of IVF treatments, that she had thrown everything at it, only to face the crushing reality that it hadn't worked. She confessed that she wished someone had told her earlier to freeze her eggs, that time and the pressure of silence had stolen options she might have otherwise had. It was a startlingly human revelation, one that tore away the glossy veil the media had draped over her life. No longer was she content to let strangers define her by what she didn't have. She had learned, sometimes painfully, that her life was not a deficit to be explained but a choice to be claimed. And claim it she did, with grace and with defiance. The backlash she might have once feared no longer mattered. She had survived heartbreak, betrayal, and years of scrutiny so relentless it could have broken anyone else. Now, her words were a shield not just for herself, but for others. She became a reluctant but powerful voice in a conversation about womanhood, privacy, and agency. Her professional life mirrored this reclamation. With The Morning Show, she stepped not only in front of the camera but behind it, as executive producer. It wasn't just a role, It was a platform. Through the character of Alex Levy, a woman navigating betrayal, sexism, and survival in a cutthroat industry, Jennifer poured her own scars onto the screen. The result was electric. Emmy nominations, Golden Globe recognition, and, more importantly, respect from peers and critics who finally saw her as more than America's sweetheart. She was an architect of her own narrative. In those years, Jennifer shifted from being a figure chased by stories to being a woman who told them. The tabloids might still cling to their caricatures, but she no longer lived in their shadow. With every interview, every candid revelation, every carefully chosen role, she proved the truth she had carved out of her pain, that her worth was not dependent on marriage, motherhood, or public approval. It was dependent only on herself. After the ashes of her marriage to Brad Pitt had settled, and the world moved its gaze toward Brangelina, Jennifer Aniston found herself carefully stepping into love again. But this time, she carried with her the lessons of loss, the scars of betrayal, and the quiet determination not to be swept away too easily. Yet the heart, stubborn as always, doesn't follow rules. In 2008, she fell into a whirlwind with musician John Mayer. At first, it felt like the thrill of rediscovery dinners where laughter came easily, moments when his restless charm reignited a spark she thought she had lost. But John, nearly a decade younger, lived a life of motion, tours across continents, after-parties that blurred into morning, a rhythm of unpredictability that left Jennifer standing still, waiting. She craved steadiness, a grounding presence to balance the chaos. Instead, she was left with unanswered calls and silences that rang louder than any argument. The end didn't come with shouting or betrayal splashed across headlines. It came quietly, in the way that love sometimes just slips through the cracks. And yet, the pain was sharp. She would later admit how deeply it stung to realize that someone she had let into her private world, her most vulnerable places, could still choose to walk away without looking back. Nights alone after John left were heavy with echoes. The hum of the refrigerator in a too-quiet kitchen, the hollow stillness of a bed that once felt safe. For Jennifer, the betrayal wasn't cinematic, it was intimate. 3 years later, in 2011, another door opened, this time on the set of Wanderlust. There she met Justin Theroux, a writer and actor with a thoughtful presence, a quiet humor, and a steadiness that felt unlike anything she had known before. This wasn't the dangerous spark of a musician or the blinding glamour of a movie star. This was warmth, gradual and grounding, like a fire that burned low but steady. Their romance grew deliberately, far from the glare of paparazzi lenses, and for the first time in years, Jennifer let herself believe in something lasting. 4 years later, in August 2015, they exchanged vows in the courtyard of their Bel Air mansion, surrounded by close friends. She was 46, and it felt like a second chance at forever. For a while, it was everything she had once dreamed of. Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers spread across the kitchen counter, conversations that stretched lazily into the night, laughter that filled their home with light. In interviews, she spoke of Justin with an openness that recalled her early days with Brad, describing him as her partner, her best friend. Friends noticed it too. The lighter shoulders, the brighter eyes, the smile that seemed to linger longer. But even the steadiest ground can shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rhythm of their life began to change. Work schedules pulled them apart. Silences stretched longer than conversations, and the warmth that once felt effortless became something they had to reach for. By 2017, the gap between them had grown into a distance that neither could bridge. 2 years after their wedding, they announced their separation. This time, there was no tabloid frenzy, no third-act betrayal for the press to devour. Only the quiet devastation of realizing that love, even when it runs deep, isn't always enough to keep two people in step. Jennifer was 48, old enough to know that healing would come, but still young enough to feel the sting of starting over again. 3 great loves, 3 goodbyes. Each left its own scar: the public spectacle of Brad, the intimate sting of John, the quiet unraveling with Justin. Together, they formed not just a map of heartbreak, but a testament to her resilience. Because though each ending cut her, each one also carved out space for her to grow stronger, sharper, more certain of herself. For Jennifer, the lesson was no longer that love must last forever to matter. It was that love, however fleeting, still shapes you, and that survival after loss can be just as profound as the fairy tale itself. Beneath all the fame, the acclaim, and the carefully polished smiles, there lived a quieter longing inside Jennifer Aniston, one that was rarely spoken of but always present. For decades, while the world demanded laughter, films, and red carpets, Jennifer carried the private dream of motherhood close to her heart. It wasn't something she flaunted, nor something she ever wanted to make into a headline. It was simply a hope, delicate, fragile, and hers alone. But that private dream soon became the media's cruelest game. Tabloids turned her body into a battlefield, scouring every photograph for clues. A flowing dress became baby bump speculation. A hand across her stomach at a premiere was twisted into confirmation. Even a moment of weight fluctuation was magnified into screaming headlines. Is Jen finally pregnant? The truth didn't matter. What mattered was feeding the narrative that her worth was tied to motherhood, that her life would always be incomplete without a child. Behind the glare of those headlines was a far more painful reality. Jennifer did everything she could to become a mother. Fertility clinics became familiar ground, their sterile white walls and antiseptic smells etched into her memory. She endured round after round of IVF hormone injections that left her body bruised, mood swings that crashed like waves, nights spent waiting for a phone call that too often ended with one crushing word: negative. She tried Eastern medicine too, herbal teas, acupuncture, remedies whispered with hope, clinging to any possibility that might open the door to the life she longed for. Each cycle began with a spark of fragile hope, and each ended with silence. The silence of a monitor with no heartbeat. The silence of a home still echoing with absence. By her late 30s, Jennifer admitted she wished someone had told her earlier to freeze her eggs, to preserve choices that time was slowly taking from her. But in those years, she carried the weight of public scrutiny so heavily that she was left with little space to grieve privately or to plan differently. Every step forward was haunted by a world eager to narrate her pain before she could. There were mornings when she would wake with tears pressing against her eyes before the day had even begun. Nights when the house felt unbearably still, when she could almost hear the phantom echoes of the life she imagined. The laughter of a child, the small hand tucked into hers, birthday candles glowing in a kitchen that never saw them. Yet even in the face of that heartbreak, Jennifer refused to let her story be reduced to absence. In 2016, she struck back with her for the record essay words sharp enough to cut through the years of speculation. We are complete with or without a mate, with or without a child. It wasn't just a line for the tabloids, it was a vow to herself. She would no longer let the world define her value by what she did or did not hold in her arms. Then, in 2022, in a candid interview with Allure, she revealed for the first time the full truth: the failed IVF treatments, the attempts, the heartbreak, the tears behind closed doors. She admitted she wished she had frozen her eggs earlier, but her voice carried no bitterness. Instead, it carried the quiet, steady strength of a woman who had walked through disappointment and survived it. Motherhood, Jennifer came to understand, could take many forms. Sometimes, it meant nurturing herself. Sometimes, it meant choosing peace over longing. And sometimes, it meant acknowledging the scars that would never fully heal but refusing to let them define the life she had built. Yes, there were days when the silence in her home felt heavier than she could bear. But there were also days when she filled that silence with laughter among friends, with the devotion to her beloved dogs, with the quiet comfort of yoga, therapy, and work that mattered. She was no longer a woman defined by what she lacked. She was a woman defined by what she had survived. The dream of holding a child of her own may never have been realized, but out of that pain came something no less powerful the unshakable understanding that her life, in all its imperfections, was still whole, still worthy, and still hers to choose. Today, at 56, Jennifer Aniston lives a life that is both luminous and quietly guarded, one she has shaped meticulously brick by emotional brick after decades of turbulence. To the outside world, she still radiates that effortless charm that first made her famous, but beneath it lies a woman who has mastered the art of rebuilding, of finding balance, and of redefining what happiness looks like on her own terms. Her sanctuaries tell her story. The Bel Air mansion she purchased in 2011 for $21 million remains her primary home, lovingly redesigned with longtime collaborator Stephen Shadley. It is not just a house, but a fortress, a place where she once celebrated her marriage to Justin Theroux, where laughter once echoed through the halls, and where, after their separation, she learned to live alone again. Every corner bears a memory, every stone a reminder of resilience. More recently, she added a Montecito farmhouse to her collection, a charming retreat she bought from Oprah Winfrey in 2021. There, in the quiet streets, she shares with neighbors like Ariana Grande and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Jennifer finds the stillness she once craved, far away from the noise of flashing cameras. Her past homes, too, tell chapters of her journey. The Beverly Hills mansion she shared with Brad Pitt, sold after their divorce, the Malibu beach house she once rented from Larry Ellison, her Laurel Canyon hideaway during the Friends years. Each address was more than an investment. It was a marker of beginnings, endings, and rebirths. Jennifer surrounds herself with what matters most now: her beloved dogs Chesterfield, Clyde, Sophie, and the memory of Dolly, her late German shepherd whose collar still rests in a sacred place in her home. Friends who visit say her homes feel alive, not with grandeur, but with warmth. Her dogs wander freely, her gardens are tended with care, and her favorite spaces are not the formal living rooms but the sunlit patios and the kitchen, where she experiments with recipes and laughs with her closest circle. Her daily rituals are a reflection of the discipline that has kept her grounded. Yoga and strength training aren't just fitness routines, they are spiritual practices, a way of keeping body and soul aligned. Her diet is clean but never joyless, balanced with the small pleasures she refuses to deny herself. Skincare, hydration, rest. These are not vanity for Jennifer. They are acts of preservation, of choosing herself in a world that once demanded she give everything away. Professionally, she remains a force. The morning show has solidified her as one of television's most respected and bankable stars, earning Emmy nominations and critical acclaim. But more than that, the role has allowed her to channel her scars: betrayal, scrutiny, survival into art that feels brutally authentic. Her endorsements with L'Oreal, Smartwater, Emirates, and more bring in tens of millions annually, pushing her net worth beyond $300 million. Yet she measures her wealth not in dollars but in the freedom to choose to work when she wants, to retreat when she needs, and to protect her private life fiercely. Her friendships anchor her. Courtney Cox, Jason Bateman, and a small circle of loyal companions remain constants, gathering for dinners at her home where conversation flows without pretense and laughter fills the air. She is no longer the woman chasing parties or searching for validation on red carpets. She has curated a life that is busy, yes, but not frantic, social, but not exposed, successful, but not consumed. And yet, even in this carefully built piece, shadows linger. There are moments, she admits, when the silence in her home feels heavier than usual, when the ghosts of unfulfilled dreams whisper faintly through the rooms. But unlike in her 30s, Jennifer no longer lets those whispers define her. Through years of therapy and hard-won acceptance, she has learned to sit with the ache without letting it hollow her. She has turned solitude into self-mastery. Jennifer Aniston today is not the woman the tabloids once called left behind. She is not a relic of a failed marriage or a symbol of lost opportunities. She is her own creation, scarred, strong, radiant, and whole. She has rewritten her story from tragedy to triumph, proving that the most powerful kind of success is not found in the applause of the world, but in the quiet conviction that you are enough, exactly as you are. Looking back now, Jennifer Aniston's story is not the tale the tabloids tried to write for her. It is not just the story of a woman who lost a marriage, who never bore children, who endured betrayals and heartbreak under the brightest, harshest lights. Her story is one of survival, reinvention, and courage of a woman who took the shards of a broken fairy tale and used them to carve out a life on her own terms. For years, she was labeled with words meant to diminish: the woman left behind, childless, America's sweetheart, abandoned. These labels became headlines, but they were never her truth. Over time, Jennifer stripped those labels away, not by denying them, but by showing the world something more enduring: that strength is not the absence of pain, but the decision to rise in spite of it. Her legacy isn't just her work, though it is vast and extraordinary. The decade-long cultural phenomenon of Friends, the films that made millions laugh and cry, the daring roles like Cake and The Morning Show that revealed her depth. Her legacy is the example she set in her private battles. She turned scrutiny into defiance, heartbreak into art, and solitude into empowerment. She showed women everywhere that happiness doesn't have to look like the picture on a magazine cover. Jennifer has redefined what having it all means. It isn't a husband by your side or a child in your arms if that isn't your path. It is choosing yourself, over and over again, even when the world tells you you are incomplete. It is cultivating peace in your own home, surrounding yourself with friends who are family, and living in alignment with what brings you joy rather than what others demand. And in doing so, she has become more than an actress, more than a celebrity. She has become a mirror for anyone who has ever been told they were not enough, a voice reminding them that wholeness is not granted by others, it is claimed by yourself. At 56, Jennifer stands not as a woman defined by what she has lost, but as a woman who has chosen to build from the pieces. She has loved and been betrayed, trusted and been broken, dreamed and been denied. And yet, she remains luminous, not because of the spotlight, but because she learned to carry her scars with grace and dignity. Her life reminds us that fairy tales are not always about weddings and children, and that sometimes the bravest ending is the one where you save yourself. Hers is a legacy of perseverance, of turning heartbreak into strength, pressure into purpose, and solitude into self-mastery. And perhaps that is why Jennifer Aniston will never fade into Hollywood's past. She is unforgettable, not because she lived the life the world wanted, but because she dared to live the one she chose. So when the cameras dim and the applause quiets, her story continues not as tragedy, but as testament. A testament to resilience, to authenticity, and to the radical courage of a woman who refused to be defined by anyone but herself.